Hello, YouTube. So the Security Service of Ukraine, Служба безпеки України, or abbreviated as SBU, is the law enforcement authority and main intelligence and security agency of the Ukrainian government in the areas of counterintelligence activity and combating organized crime and terrorism. Now, the Moscow-based Russian online newspaper Lenta.ru in May of 2023 published a very interesting article. I am sure the publication had to be authorized by the censorship, but I do not estimate New York Times, for example, to be any more objective or truthful than the Russian counterpart. And if you want examples, let me remind you of the Walter Duranty of the Times and their denial of the deadly famine, starvation caused by Soviet regime collectivization policies in the early 1930s in Ukraine, southern Russia, and the Caucasus. This is just so that we are clear, okay? Now, let's go to the Lenta.ru story. I find it interesting because it introduces you to the little known aspects of this ongoing war and also the current curious denial of the paranormal research history of the Soviet secret police. I am not clear as to why this is taking place in Russia now, but for those interested in my research of the subject that spans decades, please see the attached playlist in the description to this video. Now, the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, detained a locksmith, Vasily Romanishin, in the Mykolaiv region and accused him of treason. The man aroused the suspicions of the Ukrainian Secret Service because he called himself a sorcerer and was a member of the organization called Empire of the Most Powerful Witches, founded by the Russian named Alena Polynь. The SBU believes that the witch organization is actually a recruitment center for the Federal Security Service, FSB, of Russia, with which the locksmith sorcerer allegedly entered into relations. The Federal Security Service of the Russian Federation is the principal security agency of Russia and the main successor agency to the Soviet Union's KGB. Why the SBU staff decided that the strongest or most powerful witches work for the FSB, and is it true that the special services are ready to cooperate with occultists? That's what Lenta.ru looked at. So, Vasily Romanishin, a resident of the village of Vradiivka in the Mykolaiv region, was detained by the SBU officers in early February of 2023. Romanishin, a locksmith by education, called himself a rural sorcerer and spent a lot of time in the VKontakte social network, which is banned in Ukraine. He was an active participant in the organization Empire of the Most Powerful Witches, abbreviated EMPW. That's the English abbreviation, leave it at that. Founded by the Russian sorceress Alena Polynь. Romanishin lived with his parents and helped them with the housework, and in his spare time, he participated in magical rituals, which he learned about from witchcraft groups in social networks. He attracted the attention of the SBU after he put a like under a publication about a ritual in support of Russian President Vladimir Putin, which was posted in the EMPW group on October 7, and then reposted it on his own page. Romanishin did not hide his sympathies for Russia, so the Ukrainian law enforcement agencies took up with him closely. Okay? He became a defendant in a criminal case under Part 2 of the Article 436 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine, distribution of materials justifying armed aggression. On February 4, the court sent Romanishin to a pretrial detention center with the possibility of posting a bail in the amount of 217,000 hryvnias. But the sorcerers did not have such money, so he remained in custody. 11 days later, Wasilla Romanishin became a defendant in a new criminal case, this time under Part 2 of the Article 111 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine, treason committed under martial law. This happened after the SBU officers examined the accused's phone and came to the conclusion that he was spying on the armed forces of Ukraine under instructions of witches. The SBU believes that the founder of the EMPW, Alena Polin, Wormwood in translation to English, and her followers are engaged not only in magic and esoteric subjects, but on the instructions of the FSB. They recruit new participants outside Russia to the empire of the most powerful witches. In order to get to the closed EMPW forum, participants had to support the policy of the Russian authorities. On March 12, 2022, Wormwood allegedly called on them to help the armed forces of the Russian Federation and the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, SVR, by sending the data on the deployment of Ukrainian troops. Well, the SBU believes that the locksmith Romanishin began to act according to the instructions of the witch Polin, and from March 15 to March 22nd, marked in Google Maps and sent the Russian side data on the location of the Ukrainian military, checkpoints, and critical infrastructure facilities in Vradiivka and Mykolaiv. Romanishin's lawyer, Ruslan Piluk, admitted that his client really put likes under the publications of the empire of the most powerful witches and tried to send a message with marks in Google Maps to a Russian acquaintance, but this message never reached the addressee, which the Ukrainian investigation also recognizes. Roman Piluk, the attorney of Wasilla Romanishin, according to Lenta.ru, said the following: "In every village there is such a man, a local fool, and this local fool thought he was a great sorcerer. He had voodoo dolls at home and all that." Now, Wasilla Romanishin is in custody, awaiting sentencing. The village magician faces a life sentence. To understand the situation, Lenta.ru contacted the founder of the empire of the most powerful witches, Alena Polin. The witch confirmed that at a closed forum, she called on initiates to help Russia conduct a special military operation, but only ritually, not physically. That's, by the way, speaking about the operation, that's how the media refers to the ongoing war in Russia. Polin said the following to Lenta.ru: "Their organization has never been a recruiting center for any of the government agencies. However, real witches and magicians always stand guard over the state or country where they are, because they were born there for a reason. They stand guard over justice, earth, and heaven." I believe she wanted to say over justice, soil, and heaven. It was so in the Soviet years, and it remains so now. But can the secret services, in principle, use occultists for their own purposes? Lenta.ru states this: "If we take the Soviet experience, then from the mid-1920s of the 20th century, a campaign to eradicate religion began in the country, and occult and mystical teachings were equated with it and were banned. The attitude of the GPU and OGPU, forerunners of the KGB, from November 15, 1923, that's when the OGPU came in, towards occultists and magicians became increasingly harsh and repressive. Nevertheless, there were rumors among the people that the Chekists, referring to the secret police operatives in the USSR, using a popular designation, so that the Chekists were allegedly trying to cooperate with them. with the paranormal researchers. Such a practice was attributed to a well-known employee of the Soviet Special Services, Gleb Boki. It was said that in the special department of the GPU, created in 1922, he was engaged not only in intelligence and counterintelligence, but also worked together with sorcerers, shamans, mediums, and hypnotists to, for example, create a technique for reading thoughts at a distance. Remote readings of someone's thoughts. The appearance of these rumors was facilitated by the complete secrecy of Boyki's work. I want to remind my audience that you can find the detailed description of his research and his associates based on open sources in my videos, books, and interviews. But let's go on. Here is where the denial begins. The expert of the National and International Security Foundation and the historian of the Special Services, Oleg Khlobustov, said in an interview with Lenta.ru that the story that Boki collaborated with the occultists is nothing more than a myth. By the way, Khlobustov, you can see him in the photographs attached. He's that civilian-looking guy with a beard in the military uniform. But there were certain prerequisites for its appearance. Gleb Boki really had hobbies for various esoteric mysteries. For example, Freemasonry and paranormal phenomena. But these were his personal hobbies, which he was engaged in his spare time, and which did not affect the work of the special department of the GPU, headed by him, and later the OGPU and the NKVD. Again, all of them are forerunners of the KGB. Oleg Khlobustov notes that the special department of the Soviet Special Services has never been an analog of the German institute called Ahnenerbe, on Central Heritage. Employees of the of the latter were engaged not only in historical and cultural research. They studied parapsychology, spiritualism, witchcraft, and other official practices in Germany. From the mid-1950s to the early 1970s of the 20th century, the attitude of the Soviet government to the occult and magic gradually improved. Law enforcement agencies stopped carrying out previous large-scale operations to eradicate this phenomenon. The KGB struggled against them, but much milder, not unreasonably believing, according to Khlobustov, that many of their adherents are simply charlatans. According to Oleg Khlobustov, in the 1950s and 1960s, there were even studies of the abilities of the hypnotist and illusionist Wolf Messing, but they were not carried out by KGB officers, but by Soviet psychological institutes and centers. Certain experiments were carried out. In particular, Messing's abilities in the field of telepathic transmission of information and telekinesis, the ability to move objects with the power of thought. These were studied. There's still a lot of debate about whether telekinesis actually exists, or is this another hoax, added Oleg Khlobustov, Special Services historian, expert of the National and International Security Foundation. But if you want to learn a little bit more about Wolf Messing, see my video. You will find it in the playlist too. He was a very interesting person, very much gifted with powers that not your everyday human has. And in the 1980s, in the USSR, the psychic abilities of the famous healer of that time, Juna Davitashvili, were investigated. However, as in the case of Wolf Messing, these works were not carried out by special services, according to Khlobustov, but by medical research centers. The research was conducted through the Academy of Medical Sciences. Its specialists asked Juna questions, interviewed her, and introduced testing, including using new methods for studying electrical impulses of the human brain. It turned out that in principle, Juna possessed methods of hypnotic influence, according to the same expert. However, despite the general softening of attitudes towards the occultists under Khrushchev, and especially under Brezhnev, they still continue to be viewed with suspicion. For example, in June of 1977, a certain psychic Petukhov was arrested because he was engaged in psychotronics, pseudoscience about the so-called sight radiation and its effect on people. Again, Khlobostov is the source of this. Petukhov tried to hand over his manuscript to the Los Angeles Times correspondent Robert Todd, we should add allegedly, again Khlobostov, but was detained and died suddenly during one of the interrogations. The real boom in interest in occultism or the occult in the USSR began in the late 1980s as the Soviet Union moved towards its disintegration, its collapse. And an ideological vacuum arose in the country, against which citizens became increasingly interested in all kinds of esoteric subjects. Psychics and their advertisements were increasingly appearing in the media. Following the certified psychotherapist Anatoly Kashpirovsky, a self-taught healer Alan Chumak came to the TV screens of the country until in 1995 he charged water with silent passes of his hands, as a result of which he allegedly acquired healing properties. In those years, in rare cases, employees of the Ministry of Internal Affairs resorted to the help of psychics. At one time, the police issued premonitions of sorcerers as expert opinions, but practice has shown that the effectiveness of searching for intruders by aura is close to zero, as Lentaru stated. Then the entrance to many investigative offices was closed, shut off to psychics, and so they switched to victims. A lawyer, former investigator for particularly important cases of the prosecutor's office, Larissa Guseva, recalls how she investigated the abduction of the son of a well-known businessman. The heartbroken man was literally besieged by psychics who promised to find the missing boy in a matter of minutes for tens of thousands of dollars. During the 10 months that the boy was searched for, there were several dozen such appeals. In no case did the psychics even guess the whereabouts of the child. At some point, the charlatans simply stopped being allowed near the hotel where the businessman resided, according to Larissa Guseva, attorney and former investigator for particularly important cases of the prosecutor's office. Any law enforcement officer who worked in the 1990s in Russia will surely remember dozens of stories about scammers who, under the guise of hereditary sorcerers, simply tried to get easy money. This was the same in Ukraine, so that you understand. However, despite all of the doubtfulness of esoteric subjects, sometimes even high-ranking security officials were fond of it. So, at the beginning of the 2000s, the Russian media wrote a lot about the similar hobby of Major General Georgy Rogozin, deputy head of the security service of the president of Russia, whose name was Boris Yeltsin. According to Oleg Khlobostov, Rogozin was really interested in paranormal and esoteric phenomena. However, it is difficult to say whether this hobby somehow affected the performance of tasks for the protection of the first person of the state, referring to Boris Yeltsin. But the fact became public that Rogozin and another security service of the president employee, General Boris Ratnikov, wanted to attract Grigori Grabavoy, a healer and creator of the sect, to the service as an invited psychic. Well, according to Khlobostov, over the many years of his activity, Grabavoy, who called himself a healer, Jesus Christ and the Second Coming and the triune Godfather managed to form an army of numerous adherents to his teaching. They believed that their teacher could resurrect the dead, treat any diseases, including AIDS and cancer in the fourth stage, and also knew how to manage events. Grabavoy estimated a one-time session of assistance in the amount of 39,500 rubles. But when he promised to resurrect the victims of the terrible terrorist attack in Breslan for money, law enforcement agencies turned their attention to him. Grabavoy was put in jail just in time. In 2008, he received a sentence of 11 years for fraud. Therefore, the scandal and disgrace of the security service of the president was avoided. As far as Oleg Khlobustov, the Special Services historian and expert of the National and International Security Foundation, knows, the results of Rogozin and Ratnikov's occult experiments were extremely dubious. You can read about it. Well, you can see my video. I have a video about their activities as well. Maybe you'll get some additional information that Khlobustov doesn't talk about. Dan Lenteru has this in their article. Despite rumors that in the 1990s there were departments in the FSB that studied paranormal phenomena, UFOs, and psychics, intelligence officers who worked at that time refute this information. The reason is simple: the number of cadre is limited, and they perform strictly defined functions. No manager will dare to distract the operational staff from their implementation. However, as noted in an interview with Lenteru, the retired FSB Major General Alexander Mikhailov, the special services were and remain a very convenient target in order to write off everything incomprehensible on them or to them. The ЧК, OGPU, and KVD and KGB were assigned strictly defined tasks within which they existed and received funding. And if there are no documents about any works, research, or studies, it means that these are just fairy tales, even if sometimes they look like the truth, added Alexander Mikhailov, retired Major General of the FSB. So there you have it. I think the Lenteru article made things even more complicated, but maybe that's what the purpose of it was. And the hint that there are no more documents or to refute any of the suspicions, well, in itself, that's very interesting too. If Mikhailov says it, maybe there are no more documents. But that's what I wanted to tell you. And of course, I'll keep you updated about interesting events related to such research and other paranormal subjects that exist and existed in the former Soviet Union, Russian Empire before it, and modern Russia today, of course, neighboring countries as well, Belarus, Ukraine, and Central Asia. It's a very interesting subject, and you can't just refute it away. Thank you for your attention to my work. If you can support my research, you can do so, please, through the links you will find in the description to this video. Please tell others about my channel so they can find out about what's going on outside of the usually defined areas of interest. And please like my videos, tell others, and I appreciate your attention.